he let our bill sit on his desk the first time for 6 months. And I think, by the way, maybe like 2 or 3 breweries closed in that 6 months, which pissed everybody off. And they ended up doing it. And as much as, we had always criticized the governor for, allowing those restrictions to go in place at the beginning anyway, right? Like he could have, with a stroke of a pen, just made this all go away. Like he could have. We still say that. The famous quote that he had, and it was on a local TV show, was that somebody asked him, like, why can't you make these restrictions go away? He says, I can't. You're the governor. You can do whatever you want. I mean, he's the strongest governor in the state. I mean, the entire country. But he claimed he couldn't do it. So, but at the end of the day, he ultimately signed the bill. Got to give him credit for doing that. He recognized the need to do this, but it was a situation, honestly, that probably should have never happened to begin with.
All right, welcome back to the Brew Dat Podcast. I'm your host, Richie Tevlin, joined by Evan Blum, and this week we have Eric Orlando, the Government Affairs Director of the Brewers Guild of New Jersey, and a professional lobbyist. So I have, obviously this conversation is going to be all about New Jersey craft beer and what's going on, because it always seems like something's going on over there. And recently, there's been a lot of openings as far as like what breweries are allowed to do. And, being in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, we're not always accustomed to like what exactly is happening over there. So we're hoping you can shed some light on that. But first off, I want to hear kind of who you are and also what, I guess, is a lobbyist. Like what does a lobbyist do, and why are we interviewing a lobbyist here at the Craft Beer Podcast? Sure.
So it's kind of interesting, right? So I had the title starting in 18 for the Brewers Guild when I first started as executive director. But I don't know what you want to call it, a day job or not. I'm a contract lobbyist.
Yeah.
People hire me to lobby the New Jersey legislature and state government, right? So I have my firm that I work at, the Zita Group, which is in West Trenton, it's Ewing Township, has like 70 clients all over the board. So we represent companies, nonprofits, associations, all different sort of thing. One of my clients is the Brewers Guild of New Jersey. So I've been working in the lobbying field on the industry's behalf, going back to the old Garden State Brewers Guild, right? So we're talking about when there was one association at the time. 18, some things went down. A couple folks didn't like the way things were going in terms of the State Trade Association. They started their own thing. I was close to those folks, right? So they're like, okay, so we're going to start our thing because we still want to be at the table in terms of everything that's going down with craft beer. So we started the Brewers Guild of New Jersey, and I became their first executive director.
And it was the Garden State Brewers Association before that?
Garden State Craft Brewers Guild was the original one. Okay, and that's
different than the New Jersey Brewers Association as well.
So so this is the story, right? So Garden State Craft Brewers Guild starts way back when. We're talking like the 90s.
Okay.
We're talking maybe a dozen breweries.
And was it specifically craft beer or?
All craft beer.
Okay.
Just all craft beer. So we're talking like Flying Fish.
Yeah.
We're talking Climax in like North Jersey. We're talking about the guys that started like in 94, 95, like the really
the guys that aren't here anymore, but that allowed everybody else to be
everybody's on their, kind of like they were the stepping stone to all this, right?
Yeah.
So it was those guys who started everything up. They started their own kind of association. At that point, it was more of kind of like a drinking club. I mean, it was like a couple people getting around a table, comparing like what they were working on, talking about big ideas, but nothing really happening. But that then ended up morphing into like a real kind of like trade association, right? That they started actually having like more formal meetings and memberships and like bylaws and all that kind of stuff. And that's kind of where I kind of got into it. There was a time when there was one association, it ended up becoming the New Jersey Brewers Association. There was a split. Some folks didn't like the direction of the association, the way the industry was going, so they started the Brewers Guild of New Jersey, and that's when I became the executive director. But my experience goes back to 2009 with the industry and working on some of the first kind of like reforms to the way the laws were in New Jersey about what you could and couldn't do as a brewery. Prior to 2012, you could like have a couple samples and buy 2 6-packs. That was it. Right, which was much different than like most of the states in the country, particularly in Pennsylvania, where
why were they so different?
I mean, this is what it all comes down to, right? And I don't know what a liquor license here costs in Pennsylvania or in Philadelphia. New Jersey, it's $1 million, right? So if you're opening up a business that wants to sell alcohol, that was the going rate to basically get the privilege to sell alcohol.
So they saw these brewers come in and be like,
you guys
are just skipping the front of the line.
We were tearing down the entire system, right? Like they put all this investment, and I get it. Like there's folks, and I recognize they put all this investment in. They had family-owned businesses, second, third, fourth generation, that they saw these new folks coming in that were selling alcohol to people to drink on, don't want to drink on premise, and that was a huge threat to their bottom line and the value of the liquor license.
It makes sense.
Every single thing that happens in New Jersey state alcohol policy is dictated by that license value, whether it be bars and restaurants or liquor stores, because liquor stores also have a license, and those licenses also go for $1 million plus in some communities, and they didn't want somebody to be able to sell you, a case of beer and not having to foot the same bill that they did. Now, I'll tell you, a lot of restaurants and liquor stores in New Jersey did not pay $1 million for the liquor license. Their grandfather's grandfather probably paid like $1,000 for that liquor license, and it's more than paid off for themselves. But the fact is that,
Yeah, but still, that's part of it.
Yeah. Oh, sure. And that's what it is. That's why there's been so much regulation on this industry. That's why there was so much pushback. That's why, honestly, the regulators that were so used to the old-fashioned system wanted to maintain it, because the folks that were typically at the table making those decisions were those bars and restaurants and liquor stores that wrote the laws in the first place, coming out of Prohibition even. So, trying to allow somebody to pour you a beer and drink it there without a liquor license, a system that had been around for like 80 or 90 years, that's what we were up against, and that's why we had to do what we had to do. Yeah, I mean, that's what we're still dealing with today, and that's what we're going to continue to deal with. It's not going to change.
Did you think this challenge would take you as long, not even as long, but into years? You've been doing this for over 15 years?
I mean, nothing surprises me in any of this. Even the simplest pieces of legislation that I work on for some of the clients become like some of the most challenging, because there are people that come in from like left field with concerns that are just like impossible to deal with. I think this one, though, and, while it took us almost 3 years to get this latest revision done that just happened, there was progress made during the entire time. I mean, we were building support. I mean, it was funny and by the way, as much as the restrictions in New Jersey that most people kind of woke up to, people think were already around for 2 years, this goes back to something that happened like back in 2017. So it's really like a 7-year thing. It's not even like a 2-year thing. It only became a real public legislative thing in the last 2 years. And that's when we really had to like get the word out to like fans and everybody to like call your legislator and like tell them to like get rid of those restrictions. And it just like took off like a rocket. Like I never thought I'd be, working on an issue where like members of Congress together, like Republicans and Democrats, which do not get along, would sign the same piece of paper saying get rid of these state restrictions. Like I love
beer.
Well, that's the thing. It's like it's one of those things that they look and they see their voters and they see the constituents, and it's like they're all supporting this. Why wouldn't you support it? I mean, there was a legislator during this entire process that said that in a week's time they got 1,300 emails in support of us. Like, that never happens, right? Yeah. Like, having that level of support should make it, like, super easy, despite, like, all the pushback, all the money that folks who traditionally don't support us put towards trying to, like, keep us from doing this. But,
it's important. It shows that it's an important issue. Like, people think that, like, beer is not that important, but, like, the fact that matters, people are passionate about it, and, like, it's a huge...
Well, that's the thing, too. I can remember, when I first started working with the industry back when you had, like, less than 2 dozen breweries, you couldn't go into an elected official's office, even to, like, a mayor or something, and saying, you should do this because there's a business in your town that needs your help, right? When you have 140, 150 breweries now in the state, you can go into a legislator's office and say, by the way, your legislative district has 12 breweries in it.
Yeah, and they probably know somebody that works there, or
they
they're
go
a
there.
fan of there.
They go there. They go there, and that's another thing is that this legislature now in particular, they're more our age, right? They've gone to breweries before.
It's part of their
lifestyle. They get the experience. This isn't like their parents or their grandparents. This is part of. So they're like, so why shouldn't I be able to have food at a brewery? Why should I have to take a stupid tour every single time I go? Like things like that, they look and they go, no, these are like part of the communities now. Why wouldn't I want to support them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's why that's so unanimous between everybody is like breweries are such a community-driven part of every town now, it seems like.
Yeah.
So to stunt that from just the whole community means...
It was just like common sense stuff. Like the whole taking the tour of the brewery to get them samples. It's like everybody was like clearly not faking it, but it was like clearly a setup just to go through the law. So it's like people were literally, as a society, we're just like going through this extra motion of something that everyone's going to do anyway. For what purpose does that serve? And
that's the thing. I mean, that came about, and I was on the first time when we changed the law to allow everybody to pour a pint of beer at a brewery. Yeah. It was one of those concessions we had to make at the time to get like that bigger issue across the finish line, right? So we kind of knew that it was one of those things like people were going to have to comply with, but it was a matter of just like the state actually enforcing it. So I can't tell you how many conversations we had with regulators to say what the hell actually a tour is. I mean, we had people like on do murals on the wall to say like this is how beer is made. The folks down in Cape May put a lot of money into it. I remember you had to like walk through a part of the brewery, and there was like a whole like museum exhibit that
it was
basically
like a pathway museum to get into it.
Like they took like full advantage of it, and they did all this different kind of stuff. Which now there's not a tour requirement anymore, so I don't know what they're doing with that. But like everybody did it in their own way. Also too, I mean, think about it. There was a tour requirement on the books during COVID. You couldn't go into a brewery to do a brewery tour. So, like, we had to have conversations like, okay, are we still going to have to take a tour of a brewery? Are we going to have to, like, give somebody, like, a piece of paper that explains how beer is made?
Yeah, you're going to have to build an external outdoor museum.
All those, and this is it, all those kind of conversations, when we were trying to finally get rid of this thing, it made it really easy because it's like, how stupid does this sound?
Yeah.
So, like... It didn't matter what party you were from and things like that. People kind of got it and be like, okay, this is an impediment to a small business succeeding. And customers had enough with, I mean, one of the things on that tour requirement was, and this was one of the solutions the state had put, which was ridiculous. Every single time you go, you have to have like a book at the front door. And you're supposed to sign the book to say, I'm here. And then the brewery's supposed to look at it and compare it to the last time you were here and saying, oh, you were already here and took the tour. You don't have to take it again. I mean, there were people thinking about actually hiring people just to enforce that.
Oh my gosh!
And it was just like that for a small business. Like, think about it. Like a husband and wife opens a brewery. Who's going to be responsible for the book at the front door? It was stupid, and it was one of those things that, honestly, when we were trying to change the law, we always raised things like that because it became to like folks that weren't used to this experience and weren't used to these laws being like, you mean you have to give a tour every single time? Mm-hmm. And it was like, yeah, we're going to get rid of that. No problem. And that was one of those things, as hard as it was at the beginning to get rid of, by the end, people were like, it's a foregone conclusion. It's gone. Don't even worry about it. And it was, we've slowly whittled them away and got at them that it almost was like, yeah, we're going to get rid of all that. Don't worry about it. And that's what ended up happening.
Can you like just talk about some of the laws and restrictions that breweries had to go through? I know Death of the Fox always did a really good job of getting things in front of eyes. That's how I saw a lot of the stuff from my perspective.
Well, Chuck sued the state too, so that was another thing.
Yeah, that is also why I saw that.
Yeah, he sued the state. But I mean, that was a thing, right? The tour requirement was a big deal. And that was more of a nuisance more than anything, right? Mm-hmm. The problem was that if you violated it, the state can come in and like give you $1,000 fine, right? The second time, they can shut your business down for 2 weeks. Third time, it's probably more than that, and then probably you don't have a business in a month because you can't open. So I mean, there was like serious repercussions to doing that sort of thing. The other big thing was, and it's still a little bit not fully to where we ultimately wanted to get it, but it's at a good place. We couldn't work with a food vendor. First of all, there was a prohibition. You couldn't cook food on premise, right? So there was no kitchens at these breweries.
Which is so backwards because everything that you hear about alcohol safety and, safe bar practices is you need to drink slowly and eat while you're drinking. And then this is the state saying you are not allowed to do that.
Well, this is hilarious, right? So they put out a document that tells you what you can and can't do. And one of the first things is in the document that says you need tip certification for every bartender
And tip
in the brewery.
certification is you need to have snacks behind the bar.
And then you look at a place like Pennsylvania where literally it requires you to have food. It's like, all right, what are we doing here? It was really transparent at that point about who was kind of writing these rules. It was the folks that wanted to protect their self-interest, and it was the bars and the restaurants at the time that were like, we don't want them to do close to anything that we're doing, so we need to put things in place that say you can't have these food options on premise. We had to maintain to get this latest revision done that you couldn't operate a restaurant on premise. But now for the first time, we can actually have a food truck. We can actually sell like snacks, like bags of chips and stuff like that. When you're having a party at a brewery or something like that, we can give you a list of like restaurants and vendors that you can call to bring food in. We can work with that vendor to bring the food in and actually set it up. Like common sense things that, are going to mean like a lot of new revenue to some of the breweries that hopefully they can kind of get back up on their feet. I mean, think about it. You have all these restrictions in place. You had COVID. You had all this lack of revenue coming in. Now it's like all these things are opened up again. I mean, there should be a lot of customers coming in. There should be a lot of events happening. There should be all these different things happening that hopefully these folks can like grow their business, and then some folks even like expand or maybe get like another location in the state to do.
Yeah, and it was beyond just it was hard for people in New Jersey to go. I mean, I know you're part board on the tourism board in New Jersey.
Yep.
And we talk about tourism here, where like breweries are a huge part of tourism because they're a destination, business. Like people travel from far and wide to go visit and like try different breweries. And as somebody from Pennsylvania, I would go over to New Jersey sometimes to go to the breweries. Mm-hmm. But even though it wasn't a big deal to like do the tour, it was always in the back of my mind, like, oh, there's these restrictions. What's the point of going anyway? So then, even though you can, like, it got to the point where you could go and you could enjoy a brewery, it was like still in the back of my mind that like I just wasn't going.
And that's the thing. There was a kind of a fine line that we were trying to walk, even in terms of changing this last law. It was like, okay, how much negatively do we actually want to talk about our own industry? Like, how much are we going to put in the face of customers every single time they walk in a tasting room, like about how much the laws suck and about how we need your help to change them? Like, people just want to go and have a beer, right? Mm-hmm. So it was like there was that kind of thing that I actually had some breweries at one point saying, maybe we shouldn't be talking to the press as much about this all the time because people aren't going to want to come in because they're going to think our breweries suck.
It's a fine line. People go to drink to forget about their problems. And like, what, now they have to go to a bar and like solve another issue?
Yeah, and it was like, we just don't want this to always to be about like a civics class, like how a bill becomes a law. But, we had some really great, customers that wanted to help out. So every single time we called upon them, whether it been like in one of our beer collabs or, in some type of like mailing or something, there was like call your legislator or something like that, they did. I mean, we had, like I was saying, we had 1,300 legislators in 1 week call a very important legislator to tell them to support a bill. We had 30,000 fans at one point contact the governor's office. I mean, the Brewers Association, who we worked with on some of the outreach that we were doing to fans to try to get this bill over the finish line, said that they had never seen such a reaction in terms of getting emails to district offices and legislators before. Like, they were going to use this as like an example for like other like states around the country. Like, if you're going to do this, do it in the same way, because it proved results. And I give the BA a ton of credit because they gave us the resources that otherwise we wouldn't have had to get our message out to everybody, and it worked. It worked.
So you as a legislator, like we can talk about the laws, but like you're talking to these people that are making these rules every day, and like you're kind of setting these programs up, or like setting the email programs up, I guess, where they can like automatically email the legislators. What sort of, were there like hurdles that stood out over the process where there was like maybe specific people or getting the governor on board, or like certain things that were like these needed to happen and like these were like kind of checkpoints that you hit to get this passed?
Yeah. So, I mean, as much as, there's a lot of people know what a brewery is now.
Yeah.
There were still a lot of people we had to do a lot of education with, right? So, there were some older legislators that didn't know. I mean, they were here literally from their grandkids that go to breweries, like what a brewery is. But like people were really unfamiliar with the problem was with the law. So at first we had to do a ton of education, right? They're just not going to support us just because we asked them to. Yeah. We got to prove it. So we had to do a lot of that. and then there's, we're dealing with a system that was 80 years in the making, if not, longer, that a lot of these legislators had been steered in the direction of traditional alcohol interests, whether they be the bars and restaurants with the liquor licenses or the wholesalers or things like that, about what their stance on one of these issues. So we had to work really hard to kind of undo that, because they had painted a picture over time about how breweries were going to destroy family businesses and breweries were going to upset this system. It was going to hurt tax revenue, all these different types of things. So when you're up against all that, you first have to deal with all of those issues before you even pitch what the solution that you're working on is. So in part, that was part of the problem. Plus, too, every state, every legislature, every state house has a ton of issues happening at the same time. The 120 legislators in New Jersey get pulled in a million different directions on a daily basis. It's trying to get in front of them to actually notice you. That's for the one thing, and to actually make some of these issues resonate. We did, I think, a pretty good job of getting the word out in local media. I'll tell you, and it's interesting having done this now for a couple of years, Philadelphia media market cares about our issues way, way more than the New York media market. And there are a ton of North Jersey breweries, but, the Channel 6, the folks in, all the radio stations, everything like that, the print media, they were reaching out all the time asking, what's the update? How do we get that all the time? That we really took advantage of that, and they made the super hyper local, the story super hyper local. You were saying Chuck at Death of the Fox. I think for a couple months he had a TV crew at his brewery every week. They at every single different thing that the state issued, like a piece of paper or something that he did legally, they showed up to have another thing, and it gave us another bite at the apple to try to get the story out. And we packaged all that stuff out, sent it all to legislators saying, you see, we're still getting screwed. You need your help. And it really helped it. But, the Philadelphia media market really honed in on this. It was one thing that we definitely took advantage of.
That's really interesting. Why do you think New York was a little out of the...
I don't know. It's funny. I grew up in central New Jersey, North Jersey to some people, but they just don't come out to New Jersey too often. It's like a super city-centric thing where it's like they go to Long Island, but they stay in the city. They don't do more with North Jersey. Where I find it, particularly in Philadelphia, they're in South Jersey all the time, right? And they get out there.
They live there in the summer.
And that too, right? And I noticed at the State House, the press row is not what it used to be. There's only so many reporters that cover it. Newspapers are definitely not what they used to be. There's not a lot of people paying attention to what's actually going on in Trenton. Mm-hmm. Philadelphia still has reporters at the State House. They're paying attention every day to what's going on. So when they see this story that might have some popular appeal, they jump on it, and they give you an ability to get your message out. And that was the thing. We always did that. If I thought that something was relevant to the day, I had people that I was able to contact and say, there's a bill up for vote tomorrow. You guys should have somebody there. And they showed up. New York didn't do that. Philly did. So
was the push for this? Did you find, Jersey is kind of like Pennsylvania. Not as bad as Pennsylvania, where there's Pittsburgh and Philly, but there's definitely different sections in Jersey. Were there different? Did South Jersey kind of help push this through more so than North Jersey, or you're just saying that kind of the media?
So I think, and that's the thing, there are certain towns in South Jersey that I think fully embrace breweries coming to them, and it was for all different types of reasons. Some folks just they had a lot of space open. Yeah. That was workable. A lot of these main streets. It's funny. My wife grew up in Pittman, right? Yeah. Pittman, who didn't allow alcohol until 5 years ago, right? So Pittman was the test. Their test case with alcohol was having 2 breweries in before they even allowed a restaurant to open and sell alcohol, it was amazing to me when she was telling me this about how it was they were one of the 30 dry towns in the state that was left, but a brewery was allowed to open. Then you have a place like Collingswood and all these places. They had a brewery before they have the alcohol, right?
Devil's Creek and Swedesboro just moved in there.
Yeah, exactly. But there was folks that were looking to have businesses open to draw people to their downtowns. So those folks got used to honestly a Main Street beer culture. And those breweries made a connection with their fans. They turned their fans on to this. I think between the local politicians, the local mayors, the local legislators, and the media, all of that came together, and they were all moving in one direction. Also, too, it's interesting. Liquor licenses seem to cost a lot more in North Jersey. There's more people, so there's more liquor licenses, but it just seems that the value of the licenses kind of drive the discussion to a certain extent. Whereas in South Jersey,
it's like the New York City tax.
People don't care. Yeah. People just don't care. Yeah. They're just more open to it. Plus, I think what happens on this side of the river and how the brewery culture has kind of popped up here, people are like, why can't we have that in South Jersey? Like, we're used to these businesses opening. We would like to have that here, and that's what people wanted, and they did it.
Yeah, interesting enough.
South Jersey is like the 6th county of Jersey, Philadelphia.
I mean, it's like if you can go, and it's always the funny thing, and people used to always say this. If I'm going to like a brewery on a Saturday in Philadelphia, and I can do all these cool things, and I don't have any of these restrictions, and then the next weekend I go back on the other side of the river and I hit my local place, and there's all these things that say you can't do it, that gets people engaged in being like, so I live here, but I have to go to another state to enjoy the brewery how I want to. That's not fair.
Yeah, I know Van Loo's out in Percy. They're New Jersey-based people. Like, Van Loo's was a street in Jersey, but they specifically opened in PA just to avoid all these laws that could hinder them. So, I mean, that's just one story. I'm sure there's many others,
and there was many times when, before the restrictions were lifted, that I heard of plenty of folks, particularly in South Jersey, saying, yeah, maybe I just go across the border. I mean, literally. Like, and there were some folks that even when, I mean, we've had some closures. Like, there's no doubt that folks weren't able to ride it out, that were saying, like, you know what, I'm not sticking around, I'm going. Because there's a state there that seems to understand how we work and wants to embrace us. And by the way, too,
and Pennsylvania has tight liquor laws, but the production alcohol laws in Pennsylvania
totally
are
different.
Unbelievable.
Totally different. And by the way, too, I mean, we kind of, the grass is always greener on the other side, right? I get it. Like, I'm sure there's things in Pennsylvania that breweries and retailers and stuff hate too. I mean, state stores is kind of a weird concept to us, New Jersey. I mean, I'm used to it because I live close enough to Pennsylvania that I see it. But, you know, the way that folks looked at some of the other states, I mean, Pennsylvania was what, 2nd or 3rd in the country in the amount of breweries in it. I mean, even in New York, I mean, I think it was either 2nd or 3rd too. New Jersey was like middle of the pack, if not towards the end in terms of it. And when you have like per capita numbers that show that like New Jersey's like in the lower 10 states per capita, the amount of breweries, there obviously was a lot of room for growth because there's a population there to drink it. The fact was the laws were stopping us from doing it. Hopefully now with these changes, we improve those numbers and folks say like, okay, there's an opportunity here for actually me to start a business the way I want to, and then I can actually succeed, as opposed to saying like, you know what, I'm going to New York, I'm going to Pennsylvania, I'm going to open there. I don't have to worry about this crap. I could just do it, and that's it. Yeah.
Sick of your POS system being a POS? POS specialists powered by Heartland have been the experts in cutting-edge POS technology for over 20 years. But they're not scriptwriters, so they let AI write their script. Thirsty for a delicious deal? Feast your eyes on our tastefully crafted point-of-sale system. From order up to cash out, this POS is the coriander spice your brewery needs. It'll have you saying, Brost. Yikes. See? That's why they have a 24/7 live phone support, not chatbots. Their experienced project managers will program your POS, train your staff, so you can just focus on the beer and not worry about the AI. Ask about their free processing options, handhelds, and online ordering. Email kevin@posspecialists.com. Mention Brewdat and get $500 off your install. Email kevin@posspecialists.com.
Maybe I'm just lived in Philly long enough that I'm like starting to recognize these Jersey breweries, but when we talked about it before we came on here, like Tonewood is the hottest brewery in the area, and they're a Jersey brewery. And I think that there's more names that are popping up. They're just coming like household names of breweries in New Jersey, and
there's some folks too. It's funny. They're, you know, Magnify up in Essex County, up in Fairfield. They're opening up their second brewery in the state of New Jersey, right? I think there's going to be folks. I think the trend's going to be, particularly with some of these restrictions being lifted, we still can't, and this is one of the interesting things. The beer you make on premise is the only beer you could sell, right? So if you're
you can't contract brew and then bring it in, and you can't like bring in other, like in Pennsylvania, you could sell Yingling out of your place because it's made in Pennsylvania.
And I can go, and I mean, I've done it. I've gone to places like Bitch and Kitten in like Morrisville and some of the other breweries where they have other stuff on tap. They have other like local alcohol, like spirits and wine and stuff like that. Like the folks in Vault. I live close enough to Yardley and stuff like that I can, it's easy to get to places like that. So I see that, and it's like, that's something down the road, like New Jersey would love to do. But like right now, we can only sell on-premise the stuff that we make. So the guys at Magnify that are opening up this brand new brewery down in South Jersey can't take the stuff from North Jersey and bring it down to their place.
That's a bitch call.
Right?
Like that.
So it's like you literally have to build an entirely new brewery. And even if you have some kind of like flagship beer that is in like every liquor store on tap in New Jersey, you have to make it there to be able to sell it.
You essentially have to be a brew pub. Even if you're starting small, like, you have to have something there.
So there's those type of nuances to like New Jersey law that I think folks are still looking at, because it's like, okay, we got rid of all this stuff about the experience that we wanted to offer customers on premise. We also got our ability to do like events off premise and do stuff.
So the major points were the events, drinking on premise, and like
some of the food stuff, the food coordination stuff. Now we don't have a cap on the amount of on premise events.
So you can make food now?
We can work with a food truck, bring a food truck in, and have the food truck sell our customers food. So that's
baby steps.
So it's enough. Like, we can't have a kitchen. So think about it this way. Anything that doesn't involve cooking it, we can do.
Okay.
You can have a kitchen if you have the liquor license already, though, for the breweries, right?
So and that's the thing, too. There's two different categories of what you would consider brewery licenses to stay in New Jersey. So like Iron Hill, who operates what we would call a brew pub in New Jersey, has a different license than Tonewood has. So Tonewood still has those restrictions on it that they can't have the kitchen.
And what do you mean by kitchen? Like, is there gray area there? Like, can you make hoagies? Like, is that considered cooking?
There's no food preparation.
Okay.
There's no food. Right. And by the way, too, we're still talking about that kind of stuff with folks in New Jersey about like what the line is in terms of it. Because we're in this new world now that there's all these guys that have like ideas about, okay, so if I have something like under a warming lamp, or I have something in a refrigerator.
Yeah, essentially you're just bringing catered food every day and just sell that.
Like there's all those things we're still doing, but that's like an Iron Hill, let's say. They have a different type of license where they're allowed to have a kitchen, they're allowed to have a full bar, all different types of alcohol, because they have to have a liquor license to be able to operate.
They've already paid the $1 million.
They paid the $1 million, they paid the full freight, they can have the kitchen, they can make their own beer. But they can also have all different types of alcohol. That's different than a brewery license that in New Jersey has, that it's only your own alcohol you could sell. And by the way, you can't have a kitchen. That's still the rules, the way it is. There are still 150 businesses in the state that are operating that way. Right?
What's the rules as far as number of locations? Because in Pennsylvania, I think you can have like 3 or 4, and they're like storage locations, but you can you're capped at that for each then production facility that you have. And then are there restrictions for? I think there's restrictions for brew pubs also. Or there used to be.
So this is it. So back in 2012, when we did the previous revision, there was a cap on the amount of brew pubs you can own, and it was basically similar to how many liquor licenses that you can own. Now, like in Iron Hill, they can open up 10 brew pubs if they wanted to.
Okay.
Right. Okay. There's no cap on the amount of breweries that you can own in the state of New Jersey. And I think you're starting to see a trend, and I think, the folks down here like Swedesboro, they're opening up like their satellite location, the old Devil's Creek. The folks, like I said, in Magnify up in North Jersey, they're opening up their satellite location down in South Jersey. Bonesaw, they got the place in Deptford. They're also talking about opening up a place in Freehold in Monmouth County, right? So the idea now that you can have a certain amount of food collaboration to bring food in that somebody else is cooking. You don't have those event restrictions that say you can only show a baseball game 52 times a year, or you can only have amplified music 52 times a year.
It was like something about like acoustic music versus like electric music. I was like, what?
No, I mean, and that's the thing too. It's laughable to think about how long that stuff was in place, but it was in place, like, no lie, 7 years. And how an agency that's supposed to regulate alcohol was given the authority to literally dictate the difference between somebody strumming an acoustic guitar versus plugging into an amp. And like I was saying before,
and I'm just like,
yeah,
like where does the buck end there? Like who's
the
one that's
unless we said something, it was going to keep going.
Convening they're now in charge of alcohol, and they are also now a musical expert. Like,
well, and that's the thing we had. So what we were always told, and I think it's still to a certain extent, we operate under a license, so the entire facility is licensed. Anything that went on inside the licensed facility, they could tell us what to do. They didn't have to do with the alcohol. It was everything that was literally in the building. So, I mean, and they with other different types of businesses that operate under, alcohol laws, they've done not to the extent that impacted this industry, but they've gone places there that, people have reacted to the same way negatively. But this was such an overshoot that, that's why there was such a huge reaction to. I mean, they almost gave us material to work with to a certain extent. Now, nobody should have gone through it for as long as they went through because, I mean, business is closed because of what they did. Some people that put like life savings that had mortgages on the line. I mean,
and
like,
even if
really
they didn't close,
stuff.
there's basically like 3-4 years of revenue that they don't have now.
Yeah.
Like they're still working up to then make their next expansion.
I mean, couple that with COVID, people lost their jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, right? Like people had jobs on the line. There is, you think about it, like, how many businesses go into a can of beer or a glass of beer, right? It's like, it's the folks that sell you the grain. It's the hops. It's the materials. It's the labels. It's, it's every different component of that business. They're selling you something and there's a business attached to that. The less beer you sell, the less people make downstream.
And it's manufacturing jobs that are like stable jobs that everyone talks about all over the country. Like we need more of this to make like the economy better, to make everything more stable. It's like these are the jobs that are good jobs that you want people in your community to have.
I always think, and this is it, we're kind of like the perfect storm in terms of an industry, right? So it's small business. Everybody loves small business. Everybody wants to tout small business. It's manufacturing, right? There's not too many industries that are coming up these days that are manufacturing. We're tourism, right? We serve a lot of purposes. A lot of states, including New Jersey to a certain extent, are trying to promote the idea that, there's this industry out there along with everybody else in craft beverage and wine and things like that you should go see other than just going to the Jersey Shore. Because New Jersey, it's like every single dollar of promotion goes to the Jersey Shore. We're trying to get our fair share of that too. I mean, agriculture, right? Folks are increasingly losing local products in their beers. There's Rabbit Hill down in South Jersey that's supplying a lot of the breweries all over the state, and people take pride in doing that. I mean, even some of the beers, like, the beer that we're doing for the New Jersey campaign now is using Rabbit Hill malt in some cases, right? So it's like there's an agricultural component too. So you have all of those things that people really care about wrapped into one industry. Mm-hmm. To me, it's like it's the easiest thing to embrace because it's got something for everybody. So if you're, I don't know, a local politician that's trying to show you're trying to help out local businesses and appeal to voters, this is the industry to work with, right? This is it. This is an easy lift. They're really cool people. People like them. It makes all the sense in the world to be involved in this industry.
When did you get involved? We talked about this beforehand, but a little bit about just how you made your journey.
So I have been working in the lobbying industry. So I got my first job in the lobbying industry in 2002, right? So it took a little bit of time, for me to actually, start working with this industry. But I was a craft beer fan. Like I started drinking it, started learning more about it. But I'm thinking like, okay, so how do I work with this industry in some capacity? Because I know there's going to be some challenges to it. Read up a little about it, like some things that were going on out west in terms of different laws and things that were getting done. And I contacted the Brewers Association, and I talked to Paul Gatza. And I talked to Paul, and I said, Paul, if there's ever an opportunity to work with your industry, I'd love to do it. So what he ended up doing was he goes, well, there's this brewery owner down in South Jersey that is, kind of running the local guild in the state. which I didn't even know I was used to associations and things like that. I didn't know what a guild was. You should talk to him. Here's his email address. It was Gene Muller at Flying Fish. So I had reached out to Gene and I said, I would love the opportunity to work with you guys. If you ever want to do something, let me know. And Gene got back to me. He said, well, take a drive down to Cherry Hill and we could talk. So I went down. So it was the old Cherry Hill Flying Fish location, which was the now, sadly, old Forgotten Boardwalk Cherry Hill location. And I talked to Gene in his little tasting room at the time and said, here's what I do. What do you need? And he goes, well, honestly, I was trying to do all of this government stuff myself. We got run over by a bill a couple of years ago that had to do with franchise law. I missed the boat on that entirely. Now we're getting screwed. So I know if I want to make any changes to state laws, I need a lobbyist. So that's how I got involved. So we started talking, and I remember it was my first meeting with, at the time it was the Garden State Craft Brewers Guild. It was at Triumph Brewing Company in Princeton. It was at the old location, which, by the way, it looks like the new one in Palmer Square in Princeton is going to open soon. It looks gorgeous. But so we're sitting around a table, and I think there's like 10 or 12 of us. And there's a couple different breweries that are there at the time. And we just start running through issues they want to take on. And it was this idea that at the time, they were only allowed to pour you, I think it was 4 3-ounce samples to try and sell you 2 6-packs. And they saw everything that was going on in the rest of the country, including Pennsylvania, and they went, what the hell? We want to have the same kind of rights that everybody else has. And by the way, this puts this in the context. Flying Fish, I think, technically opened up the same year as Yards, right? So they saw this business on the other side of the river that was just taken off. And they were like, okay, there's something wrong with New Jersey that's not allowing us to get there because we're making great beer and we're working with the same people.
And this is nothing against Yards, but it's like Yards would have been successful either way. But during those years, everybody was successful. Like they missed out on those years where like
Big
it
time.
didn't matter what sort of beer you were making,
Big time.
what sort of brewer you were. Everybody, if you were a craft brewery, you were growing explosively.
So Flying Fish, their second brewery when they opened it up was, I think, to a certain extent, kind of modeled along the lines of like kind of what Yards was doing down the street here, right? It was like that big production space that they could do all this stuff and they can get it out further. They can expand their footprint and things like that. The one thing that was holding them back was, and if you go to Yards today, they got a full restaurant. Yeah. They're selling other stuff. Yeah. Flying Fish at the time was like, it was a really big tasting room with only their own beers. That was it, right? So there definitely was a dynamic there, but so we're working on all this kind of stuff, and it's like, okay, we want to change the laws, and the main thing that we want to do is be able to sell a customer a pint of beer on the premise. Like, just do that, because everybody else is doing that. Why shouldn't we? Also, too, at the time, Iron Hill was looking to expand. Mm-hmm. They had this cap on the amount of brew pubs they could own in the state of New Jersey at 2. And they were like, we have these vast expansion plans, we're going to do more. So those were kind of like the 2 big issues that we wanted to take on was, okay, allow you to drink a beer at a brewery and allow more brew pubs to open up in New Jersey. And that was the basis to a law change that we got accomplished in 2012 that I got to say, I mean, right about that time, that's when folks like Kane, Carton, Cape May were just opening. So it was like, okay, you have this new law that now you have the ability to sell somebody a pint of beer you're making, that cost you X amount for $6 a pint or something like that. All of a sudden, the money started coming in. And then everybody saw this opportunity saying, okay, I'm sitting on the sidelines here, either working for one of these new breweries or I'm home brewing and I make good beer and everybody's telling me making them good beer. I'm going to do this. And that's what kind of launched everybody.
So you went from like 25 breweries to like 140 or something.
We're at 140 right now. I mean, there was a thing done a couple years ago that said that I think it was us in Kentucky, which was kind of weird about Kentucky, but we had the biggest percentage of growth of any state in breweries in the entire country. And it was like, I mean, I think about it now. I mean, we're close to a 500% increase since the time I started working with this industry, right? Yeah. So there obviously was a demand, not only from the consumer, but also folks that were looking to open up a brewery that they just couldn't figure out how to make the numbers work. Mm-hmm. When they were able to start selling beer on premise, that's what started making the numbers work. But what happens, though, was that there was this reaction from folks that had liquor licenses that said, wait a minute, they didn't pay their freight. We have to stop them. And that's why for the first time in 17...
Wait, what do you mean they didn't pay their freight?
They didn't pay for a liquor license.
Breweries
Did not pay for the $1 million
Yeah.
liquor license that, some of these restaurants and things had said that they had paid to be able to sell alcohol. Now, you walk into a brewery equipment's not cheap. It depreciates every day. So it's not like you're getting your money back for that old equipment. Liquor licenses have been shown in the state of New Jersey to increase in value. I mean, the liquor license.
Which is why they're getting passed from generation to generation.
I mean, a liquor license that you bought, for $100,000 could be $1 million today. I mean, no investment works like that. I mean, sometimes the liquor license itself is more valuable than the restaurant itself. I mean, that's the way this works. So the growth of the industry from that law change then caused a reaction that pushed back on us, that put us in a place that we had to fight restrictions that those industries had talked regulators into putting, that they had couched as, we're just trying to create fairness amongst everybody.
And what was this? This was the restaurant?
Yeah, it was restaurants, it was bars,
Okay.
It was wholesalers. I mean, and it's interesting too. So,
And this was 2017.
And
Yeah,
can you
17.
explain the wholesaler portion? Because I don't understand that. Because
Yeah.
wholesalers benefit from craft brewers as well. Like, why were wholesalers so against
not when you can self-distribute your own beer.
it? Okay. And
So
now,
yeah, so in New Jersey, and that's the part of the thing. So every wholesalers typically want every single drop of liquid poured and sold in the state to be theirs. When you have a new business model that's opening up, that is increasingly getting out into the marketplace, not only in distribution but selling to consumers on premise.
are the self-distribution laws similar to Pennsylvania?
So if a craft brewery in the state of New Jersey wants to buy a van, put their beer on it, and drive around the state and sell their beer, they can do that.
Okay.
Some folks, because it's too heavy of a lift, or they want to expand their territory to business they can't get into, work with the distributor, and some of them do. But that ability of this new business model to sell beer that wasn't theirs was a challenge to them. So they, to a certain extent early on, we're talking like 16, 17, partnered with a licensed beverage association that were exclusively liquor license holders, New Jersey Restaurant Association, which also represented a lot of license holders, to basically talk regulators to say, you need to put something on the books that restricts their ability to do what we do and have the type of environments that are bringing what they had perceived as their customers to our brewery instead of going to them. So this is where this all came from.
From reading lots of books and kind of being plugged in the brewing industry for so long, I've heard that the way you really make money with alcohol is not opening up a brewery, is not opening up a bar or restaurant, is being a wholesaler.
Oh, it's
like
huge.
The money is in the middle.
It's huge. And by the way, in New Jersey, and I was telling this before about how I got into it, the laws are so one-sided in terms of the wholesaler that you almost can't break the contract. It's like signing your life away in blood. It's really tough.
It's the same thing in Pennsylvania, and it's like there's reasons for that, but it's like it's just part of the industry.
Well, that's
crazy.
the thing. Some of the laws were done on that industry was when a time where there was 10 breweries.
Yeah.
Everybody's business was
and then
contingent on.
And if you lose, and Bud Anheuser-Busch would go to these places and they would basically threaten wholesalers and be like, if you don't do this exactly how we're doing it, we're just not going to sell you beer. And then that's a company that might have 200 employees basically is relies on Anheuser-Busch.
And by the way, the way the laws were changed in New Jersey on that wholesale issue was when there were some mergers that were happening in the industry that people were losing 50% of their business.
Yeah.
So I get it. But the fact is, though, is that some of these breweries, their entire year, are making about 2 hours worth of beer at the Newark plant of Budweiser, right? So it's like, how can that same law impact this little Main Street brewery as it does to a brewery that's making 2 million barrels of beer a year? I mean, that's what we're up against, right?
Yeah, and I think when craft beer was so explosive, there was this fear that craft beer would then take over, and Anheuser-Busch was paying like $1 billion for Ballast Point and all this stuff.
Yep.
And like that's not the case. Like it's a premium product. Like it is not going to overtake Budweiser. Like,
and if anything, it's so more hyper local now.
It is, and
if it's not on your block, it's not local enough.
Exactly, and it's capped at like probably 20% is like the maximum that craft beer is going to be. But it's a premium product. Like they don't need to be scared of it. It's a part of the culture now, and it's like just what it is.
Yep. So I mean, those types of things had caused, the restrictions that we ended up defeating was just this pressure from, the traditional alcohol industry saying like, there's these new kids that are out there that are trying to do something that haven't invested in the same license structure that we have. We have to protect that at all costs. So if that means putting restrictions on them that distinctly limit their ability to do some of the things that we're able to do, that's what we're for. And they were able to talk regulators into doing that. The problem was that those conversations, honestly, were kind of done in the dark, kind of behind the scenes that nobody was really paying attention to. When some of those decisions kind of came out into the public, and when elected officials started seeing that, and when the public started seeing that, that's when the reaction against it happened. If it's in a small little room and there's a couple of people making the decisions, people can get away with stuff like that. But when it comes out in the light of the day, and from my experience in working with alcohol, up until probably the last 20 years, that's where most of the decisions were made. It was made by a couple folks in a room that had vested interest in maintaining the system. I think there's a new day in that, and that's what's kind of leading to all these different changes. And by the way, it's not only in beer. It's in distilling, it's in wine, it's in all the projects. Now it's going into like cannabis beverages, now it's going into all these different types of things. So there's folks there now, and there's always a counter reaction to that kind of somebody taking over somebody's turf. And honestly, it's probably never going to go away.
Are you seeing that? Are you involved at all with the wine or liquor industry?
So it's funny. The bill that just got signed by Governor Murphy a couple months ago actually impacted not only craft beer, but also craft spirits, also cider and mead. Yeah. So while the restrictions were first placed on our industry, those other industries always thought were next, because the way their laws were written, which came after the reforms that we initially did, were written very similarly based on our experience. So it was probably only a matter of time. So when they were trying to change our laws, they got lumped in with us. So we actually worked with some of those folks to basically kind of promote the idea that the laws needed to be changed and stuff. So they got the benefit of our change. I mean, they never had the restrictions, so they really had nothing to worry about. But, now they have this new day where it's like, wow, we can do whatever events we want, and it says we can do this and that. It's like, we had to be like in the penalty box for like almost a decade, where they got a free ride to a certain extent. But, we work with them. The wineries are a totally different thing. I mean, what we were always told about the wineries was that, they've been around for like 30, 40 years in New Jersey, and nobody perceived them as a threat at the time.
So they got part of the culture, I guess.
They got to do whatever they wanted,
yeah.
Right? They have everything.
Are they acting differently now? Are they acting more on lines of like breweries with events and like different festivals and whatnot?
They have their own. They have their own unique issues in New Jersey that I'm sure they're up against. The interesting thing that happened towards the end of last year was that some of the wineries wanted to start making beer.
Really?
Yes, they did. There was a couple pieces of legislation that were introduced that folks thought the idea of like, okay, if they were only able to make a certain amount of beer, they could do beer and wine and all these types of things. And it's like, okay, so what is that going to do to the breweries that put like their life savings? I mean, it's funny to say this, but it's like we're now on the other side kind of like thinking like, is this a good idea for our industry? We never wanted to be that like protectionist type of folks. Yeah. So now it's like we're thinking about those types of things, but I don't think there's a big push for something like that. I do see a day though that like, we were talking about before, Pennsylvania allows you, if you're one of like a craft beverage manufacturer, to sell all different types of Pennsylvania-made alcohol. Mm-hmm. We'd like to do that in New Jersey too. Like, why not promote the local stuff, right? There's been a lot of projects over the years amongst these different manufacturers, whether it be like, the local distillery supplies us with a couple barrels and you put your beer in it and you age it in it. Or, you work with your local winery at like a joint festival or something like that. These folks want to partner with one another. And the customers really like the really hyper-local angle. Okay. So, that's one of those things, though. Like, I keep talking about license value. that's going to be perceived as a threat. We've already heard it to a certain extent. You know, they're going to claim that we're operating like bars because we have all different types of alcohol in it.
Are they? I mean, I don't know if you want to get into this, but are they seeing it? Like, are the values of liquor licenses dropping because these laws are passing?
I have not found that.
Okay.
I have not seen anything official from anybody that
Yeah.
says that. I mean, and that's the other part of this too. So when they did our revisions back in December, there was this huge push for our governor for overall alcohol reform, right? He had thought that small restaurants were being hurt by the inability to sell alcohol.
Yeah.
And that the whole license value thing was ridiculous. And that everybody should be able to get a license regardless of the population in your town or anything like that. So he had pursued for like about 2 years this whole reform plan, which...
And what does that include? Just issuing more liquor licenses out?
So in New Jersey, there's a population cap on the amount of licenses a town can have and issue. So it's one license for every 3,000 people that live in your town. Some of those licenses are grandfathered back from the old days, back in Prohibition. So you get towns like in North Jersey, like Jersey City, that have way more licenses. But those licenses can only be used in that town. So even if there's a need in a neighboring town, you couldn't send that license to a neighboring town. So what the governor wanted to do was, over like a 5 or 6 year period, dial back that population cap, creating more licenses. And then after a certain amount of time, there's no cap. If a town wanted to create a license, they could. Well, as you could expect, based on our experience in the brewery stuff, the restaurants flipped out, right? They got to the legislature real quick, and I think within like a couple months of the governor announcing his plans to do that, we knew it wasn't going to happen. And we knew our changes that we needed were probably going to be lumped in with the governor's proposal. We knew it wasn't going to pass with the governor's proposal, so we went our own route. We got our bill to the governor's desk prior to him being able to make any progress on his stuff. The reason why we did the Brew Jersey beer, we did the sign the bill fill beer, all those type of things, was because we were trying to get him to sign our standalone legislation because we knew the rest of his stuff was never going to pass. He let our bill sit on his desk the first time for 6 months, okay? Which was...
Wasn't it unanimously agreed upon?
Everybody.
Yeah.
It was, and I mean, by the way, we took advantage of an election year. So everybody was like, why wouldn't I support a brewery in an election year? But we got a bill to his desk, and he sat on it for 6 months. And I think, by the way, maybe like 2 or 3 breweries closed in that 6 months, which pissed everybody
I've been
off.
waiting for my brewing license to pass, and it's been 2 weeks, and I am sweating. I couldn't imagine waiting 6 months.
But like, so we're sitting there, and everybody's asking me, is he going to sign it? He's going to sign. I'm like, he's going to make us wait till November, guaranteed. So it was, I think, literally the last hour of the last day he could have waited, and he issued something saying, basically, I'm not signing it. I want overall alcohol reform, like all the stuff I wanted to do. And I remember talking to some of the folks down in Trenton, including our sponsors, and they were like, I don't know if we're going to get this done. I said, well, you guys might have to wait another 2 years. I went, there's no way we could possibly wait 2 years. So I think finally, after some kind of behind-the-scenes conversations with the governor's office and the legislature, they finally kind of caved, but they also figured out a way to kind of paint a picture of everybody could say they claim victory, and we still get what we wanted. So they ended up redoing our bill that took about 2.5 years to get done in about 3 weeks. And we were just along for the ride, and we just rode that and finally got done, and then he signed it the second week of January.
I remember when all this was going down, seeing just the roller coaster ride that it was, being like, it's on the desk, it just got declined. And then all of a sudden, like from my point of view, it's like, oh, wow, what does that mean? I guess it's done. I think it's about like a month later, it was like, no, it's back in the picture.
So we went through a similar roller coaster in about a month. That it was basically the day that he conditionally vetoed it in New Jersey to say what he really wanted. We were basically like, we just did all that for nothing. And what are we going to do, and how are we honestly going to explain this to all these businesses? But calmer heads kind of prevailed. They saw the benefit of actually doing this and taking this off the table, and they ended up doing it. And as much as we had always criticized the governor for allowing those restrictions to go in place at the beginning anyway, right? Like he could have, with a stroke of a pen, just made this all go away. Like he could have. We still say that. The famous quote that he had, and it was on a local TV show, was that somebody asked him, like, why can't you make these restrictions go away? He says, I can't. You're the governor. You can do whatever you want. I mean, he's the strongest governor in the state. I mean, the entire country. But he claimed he couldn't do it. So, but at the end of the day, he ultimately signed the bill. Got to give him credit for doing that. He recognized the need to do this, but it was a situation, honestly, that probably should have never happened to begin with. I mean, they could have done something that, I think calmer heads could have prevailed early on, and they could have put something in place that said, okay, we're going to create a system that does show the distinction between the liquor license holder and the bar, and the brewery, but they just did it. And they did it in a way that caused the reaction it did. We're all sitting in, I think it was, 2021, I guess, at that point, in June. And all of a sudden, people start getting stuff on their license that says, you can't do this, you can't do that. And everybody went, what the hell is this? And it caused this massive reaction that people started talking to the press. People started going on TV. People started calling people. And it blew up in the administration's face. I think there was just a better, line of communication. It could have been all avoided, and it is, but they decided to do what they were going to do. So, there was a counter reaction to that, and that's what we did.
Politics.
Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. I mean, I'm used to it now, but it still doesn't surprise me. But if everybody would just kind of take a breath, pause a second, think about the ramifications of it, it'd probably work out better, but people just overreacted.
Yeah. So what's kind of the next steps for New Jersey? So, I mean, it's, coming off of 3 years of working exclusively on one issue the entire time, there's a lot of pent-up demand in terms of, what's next. Yeah. It's funny, we were actually, in the last couple of weeks, talking about, what's next? What's the next generation of, what this industry in New Jersey wants to change? I mean, there's a lot of cool things that are happening in other states. I mean, Pennsylvania, New York included, that we would like to mimic. In terms of some of the privileges and things. I mean, some of it has to go into, do we want to change laws again to give breweries more ability to sell more product and to sell different things, right? There's also okay, do we want to concentrate on ideas of just how to promote the industry, how to take advantage of state resources to just get the word out more about breweries and things like that. I mentioned before, we have pot is legal in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, literally. Pot is legal in New Jersey. Other states have looked at, breweries, namely places like Minnesota, right? They make hemp-based beverages, THC beverages, things like that. Do we want to go someplace there and do that? Do we want to allow a brewery to make other types of alcohol? Mm-hmm. I mean, I mean, wineries can do it. Why can't a brewery make wine? I mean, there's all those different types of things that it's okay, I would say there's probably a list of a dozen to 15 different things that we're chomping on right now. Some of which is okay. Sell food. I mean, you guys said the food trucks, but selling food on premise, that's. So some of the things, I mean, there might be a little bit of fatigue on some of those issues. Honestly, the legislature they're just tired of hearing about it. They went through World War III on that. It's how much do we want to keep banging on that issue? Because it's for a little bit and then it's enough's enough. Go a different way and try to figure something out. Yeah. Maybe not as something as huge as that's going to cause people to have to pick their favorite kid. Which I mean, some of these debates come down to it's we don't want to have to put them in position. Maybe it's a bunch of smaller stuff, but it's still meaningful to us, but doesn't necessarily cross the line of being perceived as hurting other people. But there's some pretty, and honestly too, there are some really old-fashioned rules in place in New Jersey about stupid paperwork things and things like that. Not the sexiest stuff that's out there. But it matters. Oh, it matters. Every single little thing, if it adds up, those smaller things adds up, it means as much as getting some huge ability to sell something to a customer on premise. We have a system here that every single beer that you make, you got to pay $23 to the state, basically to brand register it. I was looking today at something in Pennsylvania. They allow you to
put a bunch of, I think it's like 20 beers at a time for like $125, right? New Jersey, it's $23 a pop. Just the math and simple, like for a little brewery like that, think how much money you could save on something like that. So it's things like that. Also, too, I mean, we're an affiliate of the National Trade Association. As much as Congress doesn't do anything, there's always things happening kind of behind the scenes that we're paying attention to. The latest thing was, and it could be a big impactful thing, the feds want to change the way labels work and put nutritional information on the label, right?
I mean, that's Anheuser-Busch stepping in and knowing that little guys can't compete, so they're like doing it, and they tried to make the push for a couple of years ago, and they were automatically doing it, knowing that little guys just can't do it.
And that's the kind of the reaction of it. Of the BA's doing a good job, I think, of trying to get the issues out there, saying like, okay, certainly things like allergy, like contents, like if lactose is in the beer, maybe you should tell somebody, like things like that. Maybe accurately say how much alcohol is in the beer, right? But if you start worrying about carbohydrates, calorie counts, things like that, you know, the amount of work it would take for a small batch beer to be able to get that much information on a label, to go to a lab and do that stuff, that could honestly just keep that beer from being made altogether.
It would cost as much as the money that some of these places that just have like a homebrew setup would make just selling the beer.
So it's basically, it's like also feeding into that situation, which if it doesn't get resolved in the right way, you know, is honestly could make all the different things that we've tried to achieve here at the state level that wouldn't matter, because there would be a bunch of small businesses that literally couldn't comply, or they would say, okay, I'm making 4 beers, that's all I'm doing, I'll do this work once, and that's all I'm going to sell, and those beers that I make every couple weeks, I'm just not going to make anymore. So I think the BA realizes that they're trying to sell that to everybody, saying like, okay, any beer that's only made like for sale in your own state, you shouldn't have to do this for. There should be tolerances to all these different
people that don't understand the industry, they might look at that and be like, oh, this is a nice concession, but they don't understand.
No.
Like, that's not how the brewing industry works.
No.
That's not why people are attracted to it. Like they want that selection. It's part of the culture of craft beer.
Yeah, and there is certainly an element of the macro guys who have the wherewithal and the finances to be able to pull some of that stuff off, who are certainly not making, you know, all those different products as frequently, of trying to kind of capture back some of the market share by putting some of these things in place. Everybody gets that. But I think, you know, there's been a big pushback. I think I saw the other day, there was thousands of comments submitted on this to say, like, you can't do this, or if you're going to do it, you got to pay attention to the way this industry works. That's going to be the next thing in the next couple months that I think we're going to be looking at to say, okay, how is this going to impact the beers that everybody loves, and if you're going to be able to continue to get them the same way? Because to be able to sell, and this is to sell that 9% beer with, you know, that's barrel aged, that's got all these ingredients in it and lactose and things like that, it might not be economically feasible if there's labeling requirements to do that. Like, that's the serious.
Also, who's going to buy that when it says 800 calories?
Well, that's the thing too.
Label?
I mean, I think
need to be reminded.
I think we all know beer has calories. I mean, there's a thing like, you know, it's like one of these things. It's like you're showing us something that we already know. Like, you don't have to throw it in our face over it. But
no one's drinking beer. I mean, some people might. You have to be an idiot to drink beer for its nutritional value. You're drinking it to get drunk. It's like, as much as you don't want to say that, it's like, that's not how you need to be promoting yourself as a brewery. Like, there's alcohol in it. It's like, it is not a nutritional.
The saving
beverage.
grace to all of this might be is that it's just not beer, it's all alcohol. Mm-hmm. So you're going to see these potentially impact wine. You're going to see this impact spirits.
So there's going to be a strong push
So
on the level.
Kind of come together for
So
it.
it's everybody's going to basically be like, yeah, this is not going to happen. Or if it does happen, it's going to be a lot dialed back to what's been thrown out there so far.
Cool.
Yeah.
Real quick, I want to just like quickly talk about the beers you brought. I know we're getting close on time.
Yeah, no, we can do this. So I guess I like the look of that label a lot.
So the first,
Beer.
so I brought some beers that were kind of connected to one another. So a couple years ago, to raise funds for the guild and to also kind of promote some of the work that we were doing we started the Brew Jersey project. So we've had a couple beers come out, including the Sign the Bill fill. The latest beer is the Brew Jersey Clean Slate. Clean slate being that our associations have merged once again in New Jersey. So we're once again one group. It's the Brewers Guild New Jersey. So the NJBA merged with us. So now we're one group. It's a Pilsner, pretty straightforward, pretty easy recipe for everybody to take on and collaborate on. But the initial idea behind the whole Brew Jersey project came from Icarus Brewing Company in Lakewood, New Jersey. They're actually opening up a new brewery in Brick, hopefully be open in June. They had started this whole idea of doing this collaboration beer, which included the idea of getting out to the consumer the idea of supporting our legislation. We had actually, the first beer we did, we put QR codes on every single can. So somebody go to a website to weigh in with their legislator about the bill.
I watched some previous interview you did, and like you were able to map when these beers came out and when these neighborhoods like lit up, and then the legislators were actually like changing their minds, which is crazy. This is not the first time the craft brewing industry has made like a collaborative beer. Like they do it all the time, like the Maui Fires, all these other things, the Brave Noise, like all these things for different causes. And, me being kind of in the industry, I see, I'm like, all right, how much is this actually making? Like, what difference does it actually make? Like, yes, you're donating money, but like we don't see any changes from it. Like you were able to actually map that there was actually, an effect from this beer.
And it wasn't even about the money necessarily, right? So while it did kind of contribute to the campaign and help us do some communications efforts in terms of it, it was more or less kind of getting the word out about how to weigh in with your local legislator in like a really cool way. Also, too, just the press it got early on in terms of like, you mean there's a beer that has to do with a piece of legislation? Like everybody, that was the hook, and everybody took it up, particularly with the Sign the Bill Phil beer, which. I had a local reporter ask me for a 4-pack to force the governor to drink on local radio, which was an interesting story in and of itself, but it was cool the way it turned out. But I got to give a lot of credit to the folks at Icarus. It was their kind of brainchild to do it, and they came up with the recipes. They started with the first batches of it. We're now on the third one. This Pilsner idea was theirs. There's more in New Jersey hitting the market. I know we're drinking one from Twin Elephant that's up in Chatham, up in Morris County. But I know in the last couple of weeks, there's some other 7 tribesmen up in Wayne, New Jersey, North Jersey. Carton at the Shore in Atlantic Highlands is coming up with their own version this week. So it's a really cool concept, and I hope to keep doing it going forward to kind of assist the Guild and to get our word out about some new issues that we're going to be bringing up. The other beer, directly from Icarus, is more along the lines of what they're really good at. It's a hazy, I think, New England style Indian Pale Ale.
That's great.
Yeah, it's I think 6.5, really drinkable. They have a yacht juice that's kind of their double IPA, a little higher octane there. But this is kind of like just a good, solid beer. I just wanted to put that out there because folks like Icarus, who, they're not the newest brewery on the block, but they're fairly new. Some of the things that we did here in New Jersey, I think, were the most meaningful to them. They were literally breaking ground on a new brewery that they're putting millions of dollars in when all these restrictions were being put into place. And that if this didn't actually work and we got this bill done, I don't know what would have happened. They were building out tasting rooms, event spaces, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, here you are in this limbo. And, this is how laws and being put into place or not being changed could really impact the business. So I'm glad it worked out. It gives folks like Twin Elephant, folks like Icarus a really good future ahead of them. And, more great beers like we're drinking tonight hopefully come out of them for years to come.
Cool. Well, thank you for coming on. it was interesting because you are a lobbyist, you are an expert in kind of how the, executive branch works and how laws are made. And this is something, just being in Pennsylvania, it has been a great production state. So we really haven't had to deal with these laws. Yep. So to hear the issues that New Jersey has, it's kind of eye opening. Wow.
And by the way, the guys in New Jersey are super jealous of Pennsylvania. It's if they could have the experience to a certain extent like the guys in Pennsylvania do, they would sign up for that in a heartbeat.
I'm sure.
But yeah,
you're making that happen.
Hopefully, we continue it going and the trajectory goes up. But we're definitely in a better place than we were even last year. So it's good to be part of an industry that is on a positive track.
Cool. So what can people do? They go to Brewers of New Jersey. Like what can they do?
So it's funny.
You?
We are now in the latest and greatest thing, and it's local to here. The Battleship Festival is coming up soon.
Okay.
Right. So June 22nd, we're gonna be doing the festival. Hopefully the battleship's back in dock by then. We're kind of counting the days. We've been told it's going to be there in time for June. If not, we'll still do it. It might be on land. It might not be on water. But the way to support our guild and support the industry is to buy tickets to events like that. Because what that really does, it kind of underrates what we do as an association and trying to advocate for the laws and for the consumers of the state of New Jersey. So be on the lookout for that. I know there's some social media at that's being pressed by the guild. Also, we're working on another festival further up in Central Jersey on July 6th. Actually in my hometown of Branchburg, New Jersey, that we're doing another festival as well. And it's also to support the efforts of the guild, just to expose consumers to another group of breweries to try to get some of our word out there. That festival was supposed to take place last year. It didn't get off the ground, but we're going to do it this year. It's Save the Ales. So we will get some more stuff out on social media on that. Look at the Brewers Guild of New Jersey. We have a website, Facebook, Instagram, all that cool stuff. So look at it and learn the latest about what we're doing.
Nice. Go check out your next New Jersey brewery. Plan trip out there. See what's happening. And you can follow us at the Brewdat Podcast or at Brewdat. And you'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, guys.